Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're digging into a really radical, really ancient idea that, believe it or not, is making a comeback in our modern debt-filled world. The idea is called the Jubilee, and it asks this huge question: what if debt wasn't forever? All right, let's get into it.
So, let's just start with a number. Almost $15 trillion. Now, this isn't some far-off government budget number. No, this is the very real, crushing weight of household debt right here in the United States. We're talking mortgages, student loans, credit cards, you name it. It's a number so big it almost feels fake, but for millions of people, it is the single most real thing in their lives.
You know, this quote, it just perfectly captures a feeling that so many of us have, right? That the whole financial system isn't really there to help us build things, but to, well, feed off of us. And that feeling of being completely trapped, working harder and harder just to pay off a debt that never seems to get any smaller, that's exactly why an idea as wild as the Jubilee is starting to get people's attention again.
And this really gets to the core of it. We're living in what you could call the age of financialization. See, debt isn't just for buying a fancy car or starting a huge business anymore. Now, it's woven into the very fabric of our lives. It's how you get a house, how you get an education, how you pay for healthcare when you get sick. When the absolute essentials are financed by debt, the whole system can start to feel, well, inescapable.
So, you look at this huge modern problem, and you have to ask, where do you even start to look for an answer? Well, some folks, activists, theologians, they're looking way, way back in time to an idea that is frankly pretty shocking. What if there was a built-in reset button for the entire economy? A way to just wipe the slate clean?
Well, that idea has a name: the Year of Jubilee. You can find it in the Old Testament book of Leviticus, and it was basically this divine law for ancient Israel. The concept was as simple as it was revolutionary. Every 50 years, the entire economy would just stop and hit a hard reset. Think of it like a built-in safety valve, designed to stop economic inequality from spiraling out of control and becoming permanent. And listen, this wasn't some vague, feel-good idea. No, the Jubilee had three very specific, very concrete rules. First, all land had to be returned to the family that originally owned it. That alone prevents a few rich families from owning everything forever. Second, and this is the big one for our conversation, all debts were completely canceled, wiped out, gone. And third, all slaves and indentured servants were set free. I mean, this wasn't just a little financial adjustment, it was a total social and economic reboot from the ground up.
Now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, that's a fascinating history lesson, but what does it have to do with today? Well, the thing is, the idea of Jubilee never really died. In the late 20th century, it was dusted off and brought back to life as this incredibly powerful symbol for a whole new kind of social movement, one that was ready to take on global debt. It started out pretty small, some church groups and NGOs protesting in the 80s against the crushing debt held by developing nations. But it grew and it got organized, and by the late 90s, you had the Jubilee 2000 campaign. This thing was a massive, global effort that used the biblical idea of Jubilee to pressure the world's richest countries to cancel huge amounts of debt for the world's poorest. And it worked. But then, after the 2008 financial crisis and the whole Occupy Wall Street movement, the focus shifted again. It got a lot more personal. Activists started thinking less about the debts of faraway countries and more about the crippling debt right here at home. The student loans, the medical bills we were just talking about.
And a group called Strike Debt did something that was, honestly, kind of genius. They created a project called the Rolling Jubilee. They figured out that you can actually buy up people's old debt on secondary markets for pennies on the dollar. So they raised money, bought up massive bundles of medical and student debt, and then just abolished it. Forgave it completely. The result? Over $32 million in personal debt just vanished. It was like a little DIY Jubilee happening right now.
This slogan, "We don't owe, we won't pay," it just perfectly captures the spirit of this whole new wave of activism. See, it's not a plea for help. It's not asking for charity. It's a political challenge to the very idea that the debt is legitimate in the first place. It completely reframes the whole conversation from being about personal failure to being about a system that might be fundamentally unjust.
Okay, but this is where it gets really, really contentious. Because while all these activists were using Jubilee as this powerful political idea, a huge fight was breaking out inside Christian theology over what the Jubilee law actually means. I mean, is it a blueprint for radical social change, or is it something else entirely?
And the debate really comes down to two totally opposite ways of looking at it. On one side, you have theologians like Ronald Sider. He sees Jubilee as a timeless command from God to fix inequality and share wealth. But on the other side, you've got theologians like David Chilton, who argue the exact opposite, that Jubilee's real point was to protect private property by making sure it always went back to its original owners.
So Sider's argument is, at its heart, a moral one. For him, and for a lot of people in that social justice tradition, if you look at the whole story of the Bible, you see a God who is constantly stepping in to help the poor and the oppressed. And in that light, the Jubilee looks like the ultimate expression of that, God's economic tool for setting people free.
And then you get this fiery rebuttal from David Chilton. For him, any kind of government program to redistribute wealth isn't just a bad idea, it's a direct violation of God's law. He doesn't see calls for a modern Jubilee as justice, he sees it as straight-up theft. And he says that people who advocate for it are putting themselves under a divine curse. I mean, you can tell the stakes in this debate could not be higher.
So to really get where Chilton is coming from, you have to look at this verse from Deuteronomy. This curse against moving your neighbor's boundary mark, it's all about the sacredness of property lines. So in his view, the Jubilee doesn't get rid of property rights, it actually strengthens them every 50 years by snapping everything back to its original, God-given boundaries. For him, it's about defending a stable, property-based society, not tearing it down.
So we're left with this one ancient word, Jubilee. But it seems to hold two completely different visions for how society should work. And the fight over what it means, well, it's not just some dusty academic argument. It actually gets right to the heart of the biggest economic and political debates we're having today.
So what's really at stake when we argue about Jubilee? Well, this one little word is really a proxy war for some of our most fundamental questions. Are we about collective forgiveness or individual responsibility? Do we want more state intervention or more free enterprise? Radical redistribution or the sanctity of property? Is this an ancient idea we can adapt as a model for justice, or is it a strict blueprint we have to follow?
And that really brings us to the final question, doesn't it? We have this very modern, very complicated problem of debt, and we have this very ancient, very radical idea of the Jubilee. In our tangled, global, financial world, what would a real economic reset, a modern Jubilee, even look like? Is it even possible? That's the question this ancient idea is forcing us all to think about right now. Thanks so much for joining me.